think Foxtrot was, we were gaining confidence. Live was going very well at that point, even though, financially things weren't good, but there was a great rapport building, and it was beginning to sort of move around other countries. And so I think we were confident in a way that we hadn't been before. And so that gave us the, if you like, mental platform on which to build something like Supper's Ready, which is still one of the things that I like best looking backwards.
I think going to Foxtrot was, well, we were pretty confident in what we'd written and everything. I think we had trouble with engineers and producers on this. I think Charisma were very keen for us to use this guy, Bob Potter, who'd worked with Lindisfarne. And because they wanted us to sound, I don't know what they wanted really, but they wanted the voice louder, I think was what they wanted more than anything else. And they thought a real producer coming in might be the sort of thing we had. So we went into the studio with this guy, Bob Potter, and I played, we started recording stuff, and I played the opening to Watch for the Skies. He said, I don't like that. I don't think we should use that. So I thought, oh God, here we go, And so in the end, I said, well, no way. And we tried a couple of other things, and he was okay as an engineer and everything. It was fine. It was good engineer, actually, nothing wrong with that. But the fact he didn't like what we were doing meant that we couldn't work with him. So we got rid of him and ended up working with just the engineer. And in fact, we changed engineers in the middle of the song because the engineer we were working with weren't too sure about him either. We recorded the first half of Supper's Ready with this other engineer. And then we got this other guy, John Burns, came in as the next engineer, and we finished off the song with him and did the rest of the album with him.
Well, I was fairly shattered at that time, and we'd done a lot of touring, and I think every now and again I would threaten to leave, and so would Phil. And luckily, on day one of recording of Foxtrot, Mike and Tony sat me down and said, "We don't want you to leave, Steve. We really like your guitar playing." Now, strange as it seems, I hadn't really understood that at that point. I didn't, because, it was, I think there was a stiff upper lip thing in the band. We didn't sort of compliment each other very much. So I felt very insecure as one of the new boys, and I thought, I'd better to leave before I get sacked. But, this was a revelation to me. I think there was lots of great stuff on Foxtrot, so I'm pleased they asked me to stay.
From the way we worked, I guess, was, we were playing all the time, and we would when we weren't playing, we would rehearse, and write, and we try to get blocks of writing time, but I can't remember whether we managed to do much more than a week in Woolwich and a week in even a Billings, or a week in, some of it was done in Chessington. So we had a friend who had a house. So we moved in there to do a bit of it, I think. I know certainly Selling England was done there, but we did it all over the place. And we had moved on from Nursery Crime. We were playing lots of gigs. We were very, very good live by this point. Obviously Steve had come on for the Nursery Crime, but we were very much a band, a better band.
On the whole, this album is one that, is probably my favourite of the, as a totality of the early albums. I think. I just think it's got sort of, we really came of age of this album, I think, and it got to number 12 in the charts, which was a staggering thing for us. So we were quite excited by that.
In my mind, this is a much stronger album than Nursery Crime, than the first one. I think it's, obviously Supper's Ready is a huge piece, which we'll get on to. I think it was one of our best moments, but I think generally it opens with that Watches the Sky sound, which I remember hearing Tony playing those chords sometimes on an Italian tour, one of these big sort of palace sports with echoes booming around. It sounded fantastic. The band's getting some darkness, I think, more so into the music. I look back and Watches the Sky. It's got a fantastic intro. The rhythm's great. I think the words are a bit suspect. They're kind of okay. Tony and I wrote them. But looking back, it's a little too busy. But I think that rhythm, bum-ba-da-bum-bum-bum-bum, was a nice sort of great groove under those chords.
Sadly now your thoughts turn to the stars. Where you've gone, you know you never can go.
Watcher of the Skies was a very important track to us, and although I think Tony was the sort of lead writer on that, with particularly the mellotron chords, and I did some work I think on the verses and chorus, but the vibe was sci-fi meets prog, I think.
Seems funny to say it now, but I was still going to see Yes every Wednesday at the Marquee, and still trying to bring a little bit of that musicianship into the band, that they kind of tricky arrangements that they used to have, and I used to. So it's a shame we can't do stuff like that. So I think Watch of the Skies ended up. Certainly the intro was all Tony, of course, but that's that was kind of probably came from somewhere near my drum end.
I remember writing it with Tony Banks sitting on a roof initially. Outside a hotel bedroom window, there was a sort of tile roof, sitting there and looking at it, and there was no one around, sort of thing, sort of lunar landscape. It's not good to criticise things, which I often do, because these are period pieces, and as the years go by, I think I've learnt to, you can't just use the words you want to say, they've got to sing well. And these are interesting words, but they didn't sing very well. Watcher of the Sky, Watcher all. It's a stiff lyric. But a good musical song, yeah.
Walking across the sitting room, I turn the television off.
We always started each album, I did, with a degree of trepidation and excitement. A bit like, well, this is the new one, let's see what we got here, but I don't know, a bit like, will it be good, will it work, But I think albums in my mind seem to alternate. Nursery Rhyme I think was a bit hard to write. For me, Foxtrot was easy.
I think we were writing better together as a group. I mean, a lot of the stuff, individual, stuff was still there. You come into the group. I mean, I tend to remember on this album, you come in with ideas, a riff or something. And like I mentioned at the beginning of Supper's Ready, but also that applies to, what became the end section of Supper's Ready. It was another thing I'd written. In fact, the thing I'd written on guitar at university, as it turned out, the As Sure as Eggs is Eggs thing. And so you had these sort of quite specific bits, like Willow Farm was Peters and things, and we had these quite big just chunks that were all written by people. Kind of put them all in the same song, and then it was the kind of filling out stuff that almost ended up being the strongest stuff, though. Like the Apocalypse part, which was something that really was Mike, Phil, and I just wrote that, improvising, working out a big keyboard solo together, and the sort of way of playing it. So yes, I think we were writing well as a group together. And then the individual bits that came in, we just developed them more. I was very free with them. Sometimes, in the early days, perhaps, with the song Timetable, for example, I came in with a complete piece and just said, right, this is it, and we did it. Whereas something like Get 'Em Up by Friday, I just had this riff, this dang, 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 dang thing, and played it to them, and then we sort of developed it as a group. And that was sort of, in a sense, was more interesting, I think, and that's why, So I think it both ways work, but I think they're slightly more interesting when the group can all feel they're involved in the composition. It tends to produce a better result.
I think Supper's Ready was, again, one of these journey songs where we really tried to take people along this dream journey. And when it worked and we got to the sort of New Jerusalem stuff at the end, you could really feel people, you were touching people in quite a deep way. And it was, there was a guy who'd been Edith Piaf's promoter in Paris, I remember. When he heard Supper's Ready for the first time, he invited us to perform it at his church in Normandy. And this was a guy who didn't normally relate to rock music. It was more the sort of Piaf era and tradition. And there were things like that were sort of growing in the music, that sometimes you get a feeling and get an area that you could harvest in different ways, and and I think capture people's imagination.
We weren't quite sure what we'd written really until we heard it back, because we'd sort of heard this long thing. We decided we were really going to go for the long one this time because we'd done Musical Box and Stagnation. You know, I thought, well, let's just go for one whole side of an album, 26 minutes, and see what we can do. And we got these ideas. And we actually sort of put bits and pieces in the thing. I mean, this song had started off just like Stagnation, really, in a way. I had this guitar piece I'd written, which we sort of I thought was a really strong opening part, which was kind of the first 2 or 3 minutes of the song was based on this part, and we started doing a thing on it and got the sort of melody and everything. It was sounding really good, and we're carrying on, and it was developing, between little tinkly bits after that and all the rest of it, and a few vocal bits, and I thought that if we do this, could just be ending up sounding exactly like Musical Box. We're not careful, So I said, well, let's just stop the song, we had a really romantic bit. I said, let's just stop the song now and go straight into this other piece we have, which is Willow Farm, which is the thing that Peter had written. So let's just go in there. You've got this really pretty bit and this really ugly chord sequence suddenly coming in after that. Should sound great. And so we did that. And then that suddenly took the whole song to another dimension. Suddenly the drums were in, everything was going. And the second half of the song becomes very electric. And, and I think produced what was our best piece of composition during the period with Peter, which was the latter part of Supper's Ready, particularly from the Apocalypse in 9/8 onwards. It was just, and it was a coincidence to some extent what happened there again. It was another of those places where I had this a keyboard solo, and it ended on these big chords, and I thought, yeah, just big chords, and I had this idea of just sort of vocal harmonies going, and then again Peter started singing on top of it, and I thought, oh shit, here he goes again, and I thought, and I heard it back. It really didn't take me very long this time. I thought, that sounds fantastic. And it really was the real peak. You sort of had this long build up with this keyboard solo, which sort of like starts very sweet and then gets slightly more sinister, and then suddenly this big chord comes in, and then 666 comes in like that. Incredibly strong moment, I think. And I think for the early fans, it was the big moment, and on stage it was tremendous. It was a really, really strong moment, I think. And Supper's Ready was. It needed all the extra stuff at the front. It's like foreplay. You had to have all that stuff at the front to get to that one moment, I think, and then from then on it kind of really delivers. So it was. I was very proud of that. When we first heard it back, having written it and recorded it, we hadn't heard it all back. We actually stuck it together. When Mike and I going to another studio, because we ran out of studio time, and actually sticking these two parts together, which incidentally actually was slightly out of tune, so we had to do this sort of funny little slowed down the track in order to make it work, which we were able to rectify this on the remixes, obviously. And just hearing it back all as one thing, I thought, this is fantastic. This is so much the best thing we've ever done. I'm really excited by this. So that was a very strong moment. Funny because it's not kind of quoted as much as it used to be. I mean, back in the 70s, I remember they used to have these sort of polls. I remember on it was Nicky Horn's show on Capital Radio, and the number one sort of rock track of all time was Stairway to Heaven, inevitably, I suppose. But number two is Supper's Ready. Well, that wouldn't happen now. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is because Supper's Ready, it never gets played because it's too long. No radio station is going to play a song that's 26 minutes long, is it really? So that applies even in England. So it's kind of it's not really known about much by people apart from people who know the group and like the group, and who bought the album, I suppose, and the live shows that we did with it. So it's a little bit forgotten, but I think it was a very strong moment. We were always tempted to try and do it on stage, but it is 26 minutes of a show, and that's an awful lot to give over to one piece from that period.
The big stuff on Supper's Ready, like the big instrumental stuff. I remember we were rehearsing at Una Billings School of Dance in Shepherd's Bush, and I had something to do in the afternoon, and I came back, and Mike and Tony had written basically the Apocalypse in 9/8, and that's what it ended up being called. This was just this riff, don't, and I said, that sounds good. And Tony had written, not thinking about the time signature, he'd sort of written this keyboard thing, and actually the thing was in 9/8. So I maybe played it once or twice, but never really thought about it too much. And of course, we went in to record it, still not really knowing what it was, but it was just like one of those moments where the tape was playing and recording, and it was just captured. That's one of our best, probably one of our best spontaneous moments. I still listen to that and can't quite work out, how it just all happened at the right time. So. And also the last bit, New Jerusalem, I think that's fantastic. So that's probably my favourite song on that.
It's funny, looking back, the way it happened, it was never like you knew what you were doing. You know what I mean? We had a whole lot of bits, and then we started stringing them together. And it's the first time it happened like this. The second half, the sort of keyboard solo to the end, was really when it showed a bit more of a freedom. You know what I mean? The keyboard solo was just really myself, Phil, and Tony and Steve just sort of jamming, and Tony writing stuff over that riff we're just playing all the time down the bottom with no movement, so he can move around the chords a lot. But the moment when we built to that 666 bit, it was one of those few moments in your career where you actually got a great sounding thing, and Pete came in with it's a vocal line we hadn't sung together. He laid it on top. We hadn't been rehearsing it like that. I mean, he just came in, we imagined there was some singing there, or maybe not, and it sounded fantastic. I likened it to Mama. I think the middle eight of Mama and this bit have got similar things where just it's really one of those moments in your career where you go in and Peter first of all and Phil later had laid this vocal down. It's just like fantastic, so strong. So it shows a bit more freedom, because we tend to write songs much more compact, lots of bits in it, whereas this was a bit freer. You'd stay on a section for a bit longer and let things happen.
He's writing the lyrics of a brand new tune.
What I've always loved about this business as a writer, and you learn it as you go along, is that there's luck. I mean, luck does come into it. And things that seem quite effortless, as this was, are always good. We weren't aware when we put it all together that we had a really strong thing, that it was good. But things that happen without the feeling of trying are often the best things, I think. And I think someone really had that sort of feeling about it.
I think we were beginning to know who we were as writers, and also know how to deliver it as performers. Whereas I think, it's a coming of age piece, I think, in lots of ways.
It functioned like the introduction to Supper's Ready because it just went straight into Supper's Ready, so people just assumed it was part of Supper's Ready. That's fine, but it was 1 minute 30 seconds of me coming up with something that was based on a Bach prelude, I think it was for cello, and I was amazed that the guys let me put it on the album. To be honest, I remember playing it to them in rehearsal one day, and Phil said, "It sounds like there ought to be applause at the end of it." So I'm thank you, Phil, for that. Because otherwise perhaps it wouldn't have made it onto the album. It's very nice, it's slightly sort of, I was thinking along the lines of Tudor composers like William Byrd, writing short pieces like the Earl of Salisbury, very short pieces, 1 minute 30 seconds, perfectly good enough for a Tudor composer, but for rock and roll, in those days nobody told you that you couldn't.
Get him out by Friday. You don't get paid till the last one's well on his way.
Get 'Em Out by Friday was a song essentially about people being kicked out of rented accommodation. So there was, I think, some of the Rackman stories of sort of bad landlords and that sort of thing. And I put in a little extra thought there about evolving the species to shrink people, so that with genetic engineering you might make people a lot shorter, which would mean you could get many more apartments in the same building. And it was done, as a sort of slight comment on attitudes of landlords to tenants. But there is actually, I think, a reasonable argument that when we are fully controlling our evolution genetically, which I think we will be, maybe not in my lifetime, but in my children's lifetime, there may be a decision to go smaller, I mean, that's one way of using less of nature's resources in all sorts of areas. So get short might be a slogan of the future. Part social comment, part prophetic.
Get Out on Friday is a good song, I think, actually. A little example of where, I mean, a great lyric, nice idea. An example of where something we did suffer from, we had too much stuff on a song. You know what I mean? The track was great without any vocals. It sounded good, but in fact, when the vocals came on, there's a very clever lyric and a great performance from Peter. It's almost too much in there. As the years tick by later on, 10 years down the line, we started to realise that there's a danger in actually not getting the voice early on when you're actually playing tracks, because in a sense, sometimes in those days we'd often do that track instrumentally. People would go away and come back with a lyric sometimes and vocal ideas, and hadn't sung much beforehand. Whereas, sometimes in the later songs you can just play the chord of A for 8 bars, which instrumentally sounds a bit boring. When there's a great vocal on top, it really works. So we sort of had more space later on to let the voice do its thing. And this song suffered a bit from having just too many good ideas in it.
Because there was nothing to sing at the time, Peter wouldn't necessarily sing. He'd be playing his bass drum, he'd be playing his tambourine, he'd be playing the flute, shouting something, singing something. We couldn't hear it because it was in the rehearsal room, not very good PA. And we'd get these great things that actually sounded like instrumental things. And then he would go away and come back with a lyric. And it would it'd be so crowded, so dense, and the idea was great, because this was the idea of running short of space and property. So let's try and get people to become smaller. I think it was kind of roughly the gist. But no, we did find that the downside to the way we were writing and the kind of just the technical hearing a voice at that stage meant that we would write these things and they would come back a little busy, a little dense, by which time it was too late. Because sometimes we'd recorded the backing tracks, and then we'd say, okay, well, you go and write the lyrics for that, you go and write lyrics for that, and then the lyrics would come back, and we put a vocal on, and it was like, sometimes.
The second best song is definitely Get 'Em Out by Friday for me on this album. I mean, I think that's a much better song than Watch with the Sky. So the introduction is a sort of, is a kind of a bit of an iconic sort of piece, I suppose, with Genesis. But it's, people forget about the other ones. I mean, but I don't know. I know a lot of people who think Can You Sit It in the Coastline is one of their favourite tracks, So I think I think every piece on this worked pretty well. It's just strong. I mean, the end section of Can You Sit It is really good. I think it's sort of, the first part's good. It's a really good song. And then it's just a bit fragmented, that song. I think that's where it suffers slightly. But the last part is a good instrumental piece as well. So, I just said before, I feel this album is strong all the way through.
Skimming by as eyes of the past.
I was less happy with this sleeve than I was with the first two. I think the style was losing some of its appeal to me, even though the Fox character, I think worked. And then I'd had this sort of Fox idea of really, which was related to, I think, hunting and the hunted, and I was looking at all sorts of esoteric stuff, and numerology was one of the things that when I wrote out the letters, each letter carries a certain value, and A, B, C, D, E, F, and then next time you come round you get to O, and then you get to X, all of which are under the number 6. So then there was the Revelation references and 666 and all that crap. So there was a sort of hidden element to it, which we were just playing around with, really. And it wasn't the backwards playing, devil worshipping version, but this mixture of sort of Christian and pagan symbolism was, I think, part of that journey.
When I first saw it, I thought I wasn't sure about it, to be honest. if I'm honest, it looked rather like a kind of collage of unlikely things. It looked like a number of cutouts. Since then, I've come to understand the concept of collage a little more, and I think it works. But at the time, I thought this is just strange, and does it work? And it had this sort of flat, one-dimensional sort of look because it was collage, I suspect.
Well, I thought this was the weakest of the album covers he did, certainly at the time. I mean, you come back to it now again, it's rather difficult to view it as a sort of, objectively. I don't. The sort of the mockery of the hunt sort of thing, I've seen a bit of a cliche and everything. I didn't sort of think, and it was sort of his idea to kind of do what he did. And it doesn't really relate to anything on the album, So it was all a bit of a thing. But we managed to make it kind of make sense by giving the album the title Foxtrot. Sort of helped to kind of. To rationalise a little bit. But I don't think we were terribly happy with it, to be honest. It was just one of those things that, as a group, we weren't that happy with. I know a lot of other people think it's good, but not so much for me.
Lovely atmosphere on Trespass and Nursery Crime. They felt like paintings and had a nice texture. This felt a little bit... It was okay, but he just put together a bunch of images that were in the lyrics, in a sense. I think it didn't do it for me. I think it was a bit weak. And I guess that's why we changed the next one, I think, actually, time to move on, in a sense.
For me, it was like getting a little bit busy, and I guess that was one of the reasons why we felt, we didn't know that then, but that was the last one that Paul did for us, because I just felt that Trespass did have an elegance about it, and Nursery Crime had more butch, but this was just a bit busy, it looked like it had been, didn't look professional for some reason. The Fox's Head lady, or a figure anyway, on a bit of ice, is it? And the water, it's all a bit dated now. But I mean, it does sum up the album, the period. You just sort of, straight away you're there. But what do I think? What did I think of it? I thought it was okay, but not particularly special.
I used to wear this UV makeup and bat wings, but it would start the show, and in darkness, the UV lights would slowly come on, and these big droning chords would appear out of nowhere, and then you'd see these two little points of light, which would be the eyes lit up, and we had a white backcloth at that time.
Well, Peter had started, as I said before, really trying to find things to do on stage, and she developed into wearing these kind of, the masks and everything, which on Supper's Ready worked really well. I mean, the flower idea was, at the time it seemed a bit crass, but it just worked so well, As I said, it happened at that point I was talking about in Supper's Ready, where the music went from pretty to silly, and he just sort of suddenly said a flower and stuck this thing on his face, and it was a great musical moment.
A flower? If you go down to Willow Farm.
Paul Conroy, who was working with us as an agent, and apparently I think Glenn Coulson, were talking about ways of trying to market this record, and I think Paul got the music, but it wasn't really Glenn's cup of tea at all. But when they saw the cover and saw this fox character, they thought, oh, maybe we should pay someone a few quid and have them wear a fox head, and then I thought, well, actually, if we're going to do that, I should try doing that. So I took a red dress from my wife's wardrobe, she told me since it was an Ossie Clark dress, it would probably be worth quite a lot now, and I could just about get into it. I put the fox head on, and the first gig was actually in this old boxing ring in Dublin, which, while now being a very progressive, tolerant, open city at that point, there was a shocked silence when I walked out on stage, seeing a man in a dress and in a sort of animal head. There was a visceral sense of shock that you could feel, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, we'll do that a bit more.
Pete probably very clearly realised that if he tried to run it by the band and get a committee vote on it, we'd all have said, you've got to be kidding, So he cleverly appeared on stage with a red dress and a fox's head. And we all kind of just went, wow.
There was a ton of arguments about it, you know, and I thought, fuck it, I'm just going to do it. You know, because we were always doing this sort of band democracy stuff, and actually it wasn't a real democracy because some people were more powerful than others, and the more bloody-minded of us tended to get their way more often, and as it is in every band the world over.
We realised, you know, I mean, the story is that, you know, we did it and we weren't sure about it. We were happy enough with it in a way, but the next week he was on the front page of Melody Maker, so we thought, this is interesting.
And at that point, the band said, oh, maybe Peter has something. Perhaps we shouldn't fight him on all of this, because they definitely got front page good.
People often think it was the other way around, that the sort of thing he was depicted on the cover, but of course he just dressed up, which is funny in a way because we weren't too sure about that album cover. So, you know, but it sort of made sense when you did it, you know. Suddenly he dressed up, turning up like that. And I can't remember exactly what I thought at the time, really. I mean, you know, it was probably didn't approve to begin with, but then got used to the idea.
Hey, my baby, don't you know our love is true?
Foxtrot always appears to me to have an album where things took us by surprise, as in Summer's Ready, and the end section, you know. And later on in our career, that happened a lot more. But in those days, there were 5 of us full of ideas. It was a little bit of a sort of almost too many ideas going around. So bits like this, where things could just happen a bit freer, I think were great.
Well, Foxtrot was the first album to sort of, I think, where we kind of sounded sort of convincing to the outside world. I think we sort of convinced ourselves with the first 2 albums and convinced maybe our fans. And I thought, but I think Substance just took it on slightly another level, that people could hear this album who had never heard Genesis before and be interested in it. And I think that was a significant moment. And it was, as I said, it was a minor hit. I mean, it wasn't a big hit, but it certainly was sold a lot more than its predecessors had.
I would summarise the period as a band trying to find its feet, hoping that the record company were going to renew their contract each album, and we were being given the thumbs up to develop very, very slowly, thanks to Tony Stratton-Smith, who was a wonderful man who signed acts who he felt passionately about, and he would give them and us many, many albums to make it. It was a very slow burn in those days. It was, you know, there was nothing meteoric about the rise of Genesis.
I was definitely getting to feel like a band, and I think Phil was certainly beginning to get more comfortable in terms of expressing himself musically, and Steve would be sort of in would assert himself, but I mean, still slightly tentatively. I think, you know, there was always a holding back element with Steve when I was there, and I think that loosened up, you know, when he went from glasses to contact lenses.
I have very fond memories. We did most of it at Island Studios in Basing Street, and John Burns was the engineer, kind of helped us. And, you know, hearing those things and hearing something really put together, and it was very strong, you know. We were actually getting somewhere, and here we had a great album. And this album, when it came out, did better than the one before. So it was all, you know, power to the people.